Alright, hello everyone, and welcome to my panel, Every Godzilla Video Game Ever. A little bit about myself. I'm Alex Rushdie, and I am a lifelong kaiju, tokusatsu, and video game fan. I've made it basically my raison d'etre to find and catalog every single kaiju video game in existence. You can check out my blog about that at controlthemonsters.com or my other videos on this YouTube channel. I also run Seismic Toys, which is a designer toy company that produces soft vinyl kaiju toys. You can check us out at seismictoys.com. And lastly, I am the CEO of an independent video game company, 13AM Games. And that last one is probably the most relevant to what I'm about to talk about. Now, this is the fourth in a series of panels that I've been giving at G-Fest over the years. And if you'd like, you can catch up on the previous panels here on my YouTube channel, Control All Monsters. Now, my day job at 13AM Games allowed me to create a giant kaiju video game that you may have heard of called Dawn of the Monsters. It's available on every major platform, and it's a kaiju-themed beat-em-up you can play cooperatively with a friend. And of course, actually, we're all now sold out of these, but you could get it physically. I think there's still a few places where you can grab it physically, like Video Games Plus. All of Seismic's copies have sold out, but you can still find the game physically, or you can pick it up digitally. So, since the last Kaiju video game panel that I did, there have been a few developments. So I always like to cover any new announcements or any new releases that have happened in between panels, even if they're not directly related to what we're covering here. So the first is that Taito Milestones 2 released, and that gave us an official high-quality release of Dino Rex, which is a classic dinosaur fighting arcade game from the 90s. And it was a game that was formerly covered, I believe, in the first Kaiju Video Games History panel. So definitely check it out. It is a crazy game, and it uses stop-motion animation to produce its graphics, which is kind of cool. Next, Squad 51 versus the Flying Saucers, which was formerly only available on PC and Nintendo Switch, is now available on Xbox, PS4, and PS5. So this is a kind of side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, very much inspired by classic 50s science fiction films. And of course, for our own game, Dawn of the Monsters, it received a DLC expansion called Dawn of the Monsters Arcade Edition, and that included a brand new character called Meteor Temujin, who is very much Megazord-inspired, very Sentai-inspired, as well as a brand new arcade mode, a bunch of trial missions, a ton of new costumes and things like that. So definitely worth checking out. And it also got a release on iOS and Android. So you can actually play this game on mobile right now. And if you have a Crunchyroll subscription, it's actually just included in that Crunchyroll subscription. So if you're an anime fan and you have Crunchyroll, you can now play Dawn of the Monsters for free on your mobile device of choosing. And it supports Bluetooth controllers, it supports touch, you can kind of play it however you like. Gigabash got 2 new DLC releases. The Godzilla Nemesis DLC that included King Ghidorah and Hedorah, and the Ultraman DLC that included Carmilla, Tiga, Original Ultraman, and Bolton. And Exidio, the Kaiju Simulator, came out. I believe it's still in early access, but they added Megadon from Dawn of the Monsters as a guest character, as well as the monster from Terror of Hemosaurus, which we've covered previously on this panel. Now, I covered this game, Daikaiju Deberes, way back in 2019, but I'm super happy to announce that this now has a complete English fan translation. So if you've ever wanted to play this game, you can now check it out fully in English and experience it properly. So now let's move on to every Godzilla video game ever made. Now, before we get into the complete history of Godzilla video games, I want to set some ground rules about what I will and will not be covering. First off, if it's electronic, if it has a screen, and it has gameplay and interactive elements, I'm going to cover it. I will also include things like Pinball where I can, since they are very adjacent to this kind of experience. Now, that all being said, I will not be covering gambling machines. So that means no pachinko, slots, or anything like that. Gambling isn't gaming, even though some mobile games come pretty dangerously close to that style of play. I will also not be covering rides. So we need some level of interaction here, even if it is limited. Rides are closer to movies than they are to games. Lastly, I will not be covering guest appearances, DLC, cameos, events, or collaborations. These are Godzilla video games. At the very least, Godzilla needs to be a highlighted feature included in the base game, on the disc, or on the cartridge. So, let's kick things off. Now, while there are two unlicensed Godzilla games for the Commodore 64 and ZX Spectrum that predate Godzilla vs. the Three Giant Monsters, this is the first officially licensed Godzilla video game. In it, you move around the screen and you use your atomic breath to take on enemies in an almost whack-a-mole style setup. It's pretty simplistic, but it's easy to understand and decent arcade fun. The three monsters themselves are Megalon, Kumonga, and Ghidorah, and the only setting available is an open desert. The monsters climb out of holes that you can fall in if you're not careful. And in the final level, Minya also makes an appearance. Next, we've got CinemaScope Adventure Godzilla from 1984. And this is the text adventure video game for the PC-88 and FM7. It's actually a video game recreation of the original film, which is pretty rare when it comes to Godzilla media, as remakes usually aren't allowed. There aren't any remakes of Godzilla films. Now, similar to that previous game, we also got a PC-8801 and FM7 adventure game retelling the events of The Return of Godzilla. And this actually contains some real-time elements and is split into 3 parts. Now, despite the name including the word multiplayer, the game is not multiplayer and instead allows you to control multiple characters from the film. Now, one of the earliest Godzilla games is actually based on the Godzilla merchandise line. It's a puzzle platformer type game where you climb vines, destroy rocks, and fight off other monsters like Hedorah, Rodan, Baragon, and Anguirus. Destroying all the rocks opens a door for you to move on to the next level. You can also edit and make your own levels. Now, this game was one of Compile's, the first of Compile's many games with Toho, a developer famous for incredible shmups like Musha and Alesta and those type of games. Blazing Lasers, Gunhead. Blazing Lasers is, of course, the English version of the video game Gunhead, which was a licensed Gunhead video game. So this game is Japan only, but if it looks familiar to you, that's because it did sort of get a release here in 1990 when it was re-released on the Nintendo Game Boy. It's basically the same game, but without the level edit mode. In Japan, this game was called Godzilla-kun, Great Monster March, and in the rest of the world, it was just called Godzilla. Now, I talked about these games before, so I'll just keep on moving along. Now, this game is a bit of an odd duck, as in the game you actually play as Mothra, running and blasting away all the other monsters on the island, including Godzilla and even Minya. So it's an odd cross of top-down adventure with shooting, evolving into a full-blown shmup once you reach Tokyo, defeat Gigan, and evolve into your Imago form. It's arcadey. It can be played for score, and it's pretty old school difficult, and it features a potential cameo from Takora from the old Toho television series Kure Kure Takora. Again, something I've covered before is the movie Monster Game. So I won't spend too much time on this, but Godzilla is in the game from the outset, even though it's not called the Godzilla game or a Godzilla game. Godzilla's in it in the base game, so it counts. Now, Godzilla Challenge 1 and 2 are pretty interesting because these are actually VHS tapes that are compatible with the Takara Video Challenger light gun system. Essentially, special images are overlaid on top of footage from Godzilla vs. Mothra, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, and Terror of Mechagodzilla, and those images are flashed at special frequencies so the included light gun can detect them and determine if you scored a direct hit or not. It's like Virtual Cop meets Godzilla, but it's using old stock footage. It's a pretty obscure pair of games for a pretty obscure system. Now, here's a classic one. So, released in 1988 in Japan and 89 in North America, Godzilla Monster of Monsters is the first true blue Godzilla video game to get a proper English release. Like I said, the movie Monster game features the character, but it's not, a Godzilla video game per se. This is also the first Godzilla game to be released on a home video game console instead of a PC, in this case the Famicom and the Nintendo Entertainment System. This makes it pretty important in the Godzilla video game canon. You play as both Godzilla and Mothra, and you move your characters across a hex grid with other monsters you need to defeat to move on to the next board. Each hex is a level that you play either as a sort of action platformer for Godzilla, or a sort of manual scrolling shoot-'em-up for Mothra. Now, while I can't particularly recommend this game, it is, at the very least, trading in some new design ideas, and it's become a bit of a cult classic, with some toys and merchandise even produced for it decades later. And this is another game developed by Compile. There is no shortage of kaiju turn-based strategy games now, but at the time, Godzilla 2 was only the second, with the first being the aforementioned Daikaiju Deburas. It was first developed as a Rodan game that was announced in Nintendo Power, but never materialized. Now you take control not of Godzilla, but of the military trying to take Godzilla down. The game is pretty difficult, and for no reason I can understand, was only released in North America, not Japan, despite being developed in Japan. Now, this is not a bad game, but there are better kaiju tactics games out there. Heck, there are better Godzilla tactics games out there. And this game has only skyrocketed in price as of late. There's actually a recently released indie game called Kaiju Wars that is very much inspired by this game. Now, I'm just going to mention this very briefly. The Combat to Hero series is huge. I talked about it in the Ultraman panel, the previous panel that I did. There are 28 Combat to Hero games released over 24 years across all genres. We're talking about sumo wrestling, baseball, run and gun, platformer, beat 'em up, RPG, tactical RPG, soccer, dodgeball, everything. The main base of this series is that it's a crossover between some famous characters. Mobile Suit Gundam is represented in every single entry. Ultraman and Kamen Rider are in almost every single entry. And Godzilla appears in 2 entries. So let's talk about those 2 just briefly. So, the first is Battle Soccer, which is developed by Pandora Box. This is arguably the most well-known game outside of Japan in the series because it features, several Godzilla characters. It's got Titanosaurus, King Caesar, it's got Mechagodzilla, it's got, you can create entire teams of different kaiju. And it's actually a halfway decent soccer game for the Super Nintendo. Very import friendly. It's also got Ultraman and plenty of great Ultraman characters in it. And of course, Kamen Rider and Gundam. And the next is Battle Baseball, which is created by Vic Tokai, who you might know from games like Troubleshooter, Decap Attack, and Cryon Conquest, which is basically just Mega Man with a witch. This is notable because I think it's the first, maybe only time outside of the Pipeworks games where you can play as Biollante. And, you know, it's very clearly a baseball game, and Biolante's playing baseball. I think that's great. So yeah, this is definitely another fun little game. Very import friendly. You can easily understand how to play baseball without needing to translate the game into English. But these were the only two Kompati Hero games that Godzilla participated in. Oh, and these are the other Vic Tokai games that you might have known. These are arguably much more famous than Battle Baseball. Now, the first ever Godzilla arcade game happens to also be the very first one-on-one Godzilla fighting game. It released 2 years after Street Fighter II, had already turned this kind of fighting genre into a mega hit in the arcades. So fighting games would go on to be very popular in the Godzilla video game sphere, and this is the game that kicked that all off. Strangely enough, this is also the only Godzilla video game released to arcades, not counting Kaiju Wars VR. As this is an early fighting game, the setup and structure are a bit unusual. If you play with a friend, you can play as Heisei Godzilla, Heisei King Ghidorah, Gigan, Showa Mechagodzilla, Megalon, or Mecha King Ghidorah. But if you play in a single-player game, you only play as Godzilla, and the battles themselves include a mini-game where you walk forward, smash buildings, and destroy the military as a kind of prelude to the actual fight, turning it into a sort of battle-action game as opposed to a regular fighter. It's very similar to King of the Monsters 2, just shorter. This also means that there are more monsters you fight against than are playable, including Mothra, Biollante, Fake Godzilla, Batra, and the Super X2. Each battle has title cards and genuinely tries to recreate the movie battles as faithfully as possible with the correct backgrounds and locations. It also includes music tracks from the films themselves. For the longest time, this game was almost impossible to find as it was not able to be emulated, and very hard to find an actual arcade cabinet. It was a Japan-only release, and it actually wasn't until a few years ago when it was put up for display at the local Galloping Ghost arcade in Chicago. That was a huge deal. In fact, Doc Mack and the Galloping Ghost team have been bringing this game to Chicago, to G-Fest, year after year in the video games room. So, if you come to G-Fest and you come to the games room, you might be able to check it out there. Otherwise, it should be playable at Galloping Ghost itself. Next, we've got Godzilla, developed by System Soft, who are known for their Master of Monsters and Daisen Ryaku strategy games. This PC 9801 game is a hex-based battle simulation game. Now, I haven't played this, but it looks very similar to their existing titles, just with scenarios pulled from Godzilla movies. 1993 was a really strong year for Godzilla video games, and the early 90s in general are when the highest volume of Godzilla video games ever were released. And this continues with Godzilla King of the Monsters for Game Boy, a Japan-only title that is entirely original and features an arcade style of gameplay where you play as a massive Godzilla sprite using fire breath and physical attacks to destroy buildings, enemies, and monsters alike. It's very simple, but it works really well as a portable game and features appearances from rarely seen monsters like Titanosaurus, Varan, Gazora, Gabra, and Gorosaurus. Super Godzilla is the first of two Godzilla video games released on the Super Nintendo Entertainment System, aka the Super Famicom. This game was developed by Advanced Communication Company, who also previously developed Dino Wars, The Destruction of Spondylus, which I covered in an earlier panel, as well as the infamous Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde for the NES. The game is split into two modes, Movement Mode and Battle Mode. Movement Mode represents Godzilla as a blue dot moving through a grid on the bottom half of the screen, while the top half of the screen shows Godzilla from a kind of a worm's eye point of view. You need to navigate the stage, managing Godzilla's energy and health, and fight against the clock to locate the enemy monster. Once you do, you enter Battle Mode. Battle Mode is like a mix of turn-based RPG and fighting game tactics. Your spirit gauge fluctuates wildly, as does your opponent's, and if you strike your opponent while the spirit gauge is high, you can pull away from the enemy to cycle through special attacks. Once you select an attack, it plays out and deals damage to the opponent. You can also block attacks from your opponent. You fight through several monsters from the Heisei series, unless you played the North American version, which swaps out Heisei Mechagodzilla for Showa Mechagodzilla, as the film Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 was not available in North America at the time. It's a really odd but innovative combination of gameplay styles and mechanics. This is a game I personally grew up with and have always enjoyed despite the odd playstyle. It's not for everyone, but it's another important chapter in the history of Godzilla video games. It's also the first time the video games influenced the greater movie canon, as not only is this game the first official appearance of Bagan, it also introduced the idea of Super Godzilla, a supercharged version of the character with mandibles and giant shoulder spikes that later became the basis for Space Godzilla. Godzilla Battle Legends is a one-on-one Godzilla fighting game, but it is a whole head and shoulders above what was present in the Banpresto arcade game from 1992. This time, developed by Alpha System, who are known for the Castle of Shikigami series. For starts, the graphics are much more detailed, incorporating more color, multiple layers of scrolling parallax, and tons more animation and attacks. You can select from 11 playable characters, though once again, the single-player mode only lets you play as Godzilla. However, this game does something incredibly cool and unique with that concept that no other Godzilla game since has really done. Each time Godzilla meets his enemy, his character sprite transforms into the version of Godzilla of that film. So if you're facing Anguirus, he transforms into Godzilla 55. If you're facing Mothra, he transforms into Godzilla 64, etc., etc. This is incredibly cool and like a real treat for any Godzilla fan. My favorite Godzilla is the one from 1975, and this is his only playable appearance in a video game. There are 10 versions of Godzilla in this one game. There are even alternate versions of monsters like King Ghidorah in his Showa and Heisei incarnations, and by inputting a special cheat code, you can enter an alternate character select screen that lets you choose from them all and even select the stage music. The music is another important note because this is actually a CD game, so we get high fidelity Red Book audio and a pretty cool animated intro. This all being said, while the game is quite fun, the combat is a bit restricted with only 2 buttons, and one of those buttons is dedicated to jumping. That and the game is pretty intensely difficult. It's definitely best played with a friend. This also got a North American release thanks to Hudson, but Turbo Duos are not easy to find nowadays. Thankfully, this game would get refined not long after its release. Alpha System returned next year with another 2D Godzilla fighting game that builds off of Battle Legends. The result is Godzilla Kaiju Daikessen, or Godzilla Great Monster Battle, a title that was actually announced to be released in North America in Nintendo Power as Godzilla Destroy All Monsters. This game is essentially an overhaul of Battle Legends, moving from the CD-based Turbo Duo to the cartridge-based SNES. Now, at first glance, there are a few downgrades here. There is no CD-based music, there are less characters overall, and you no longer see Godzilla's appearance change depending on the monster he is facing. But everything else is a positive, and honestly, this game is significantly better, and this might be my favorite overall Godzilla fighting game. Now, while the SNES doesn't have the luxury of CD storage to have more characters and CD music, the animation and art direction is much moodier. The character select in particular is fantastic. The combat is way better, and with a super meter and an extra attack button. The music is still great, and the SNES sound chip is used really effectively, and the game lets you play as any character in single-player mode. While some characters are lost in the conversion, we also get a playable Biollante, Mothra, and even the Atragon. It's a real shame that this didn't get a release here, but don't let that stop you from importing a copy. It's region-free and it doesn't require any Japanese knowledge. Now, the Sega Pico was an educational video game console aimed at early childhood. It was released by Sega in 1993, and it featured storyware that were basically game cartridges attached to children's books. The device had a pen and a tablet, and when the player turned a page in the book, it would appear on screen and come to life. The player can then touch the pen to different objects on the book page to interact with them, and can use the tablet to control games and even paint. I swear that I'm like the only person I know of who grew up with the Pico Sega, but I absolutely loved it. And to this day, I can't figure out how it works. It seems like black magic. Now, while most of the games for the console used IP like Winnie the Pooh, Richard Scarry, and Sesame Street, in Japan it had games for IP like Ultraman and Godzilla. This would be the first of many licensed Godzilla games directly from Sega. So, Godzilla Heart-Pounding Monster Island allows kids to explore Monster Island and is filled with kaiju from Toho's entire catalog of kaiju up to that point. From series stalwarts like Rodan, Mechagodzilla, and Anguirus, to lesser-known monsters like Odako, Dagora, and Manda, who rarely make media appearances. The game is played entirely at your own pace, triggering funny animations and events, and taking part in minigames like challenging Gorosaurus to a jumping contest. The game is pretty cute fun for kids, but finding a copy and a working Pico is not an easy task anymore. So this is a game that I've also covered in a previous panel. I'm just going to mention it quickly. This was developed by Sims and published by Sega for the Game Gear, and this game is fantastic. It's a mix of turn-based tactics and one-on-one fighting. So when your character overlaps and enters battle with another unit, you actually have this little mini fighting game match to determine who wins. Now, this game came out for the Game Gear. It was released by Sega. And while this game is perfectly playable in Japanese, there is an English patch. And you can choose from either playing as Godzilla and the heroic monsters, the evil monsters, or the military. So yeah, it's a great game. I definitely recommend checking it out. I think it's a hidden gem of Godzilla games. Very cool game. Now, the only Godzilla game on the Sega Saturn is Archipelago Shock. This is a mix between real-time and turn-based strategy that has you controlling the JSDF as you attempt to defeat kaiju in scenarios inspired by the Godzilla films. This is one of the few Sega Saturn games that has compatibility for the mouse peripheral, which allows you to move your cursor much more naturally. It's notable for the first appearance of Destroya in a video game, as well as for using directly sampled recordings from the film's soundtrack. Released in 1997 on the official Godzilla website in anticipation of the 1998 Godzilla film, this is a Godzilla game that actually features no Godzilla at all. Instead, you play a simple shooter-style game firing at weird monsters that are clearly not Godzilla, as the marketing for the film demanded that the creature design be kept secret. While lost for decades, it has since been rescued and is available to play online. Speaking of online, Godzilla Online was developed by Mythic Entertainment, the creators of Dragon Age 2 and Aliens Online. You could download it for free from the Godzilla website, and it featured online multiplayer in a top-down 3D action game. Players could pick from a scientist, a soldier, a journalist, and Baby Godzilla, each with their own goals and abilities. Unfortunately, this game is long lost, so we only have descriptions from those who played it to get an idea of how it played. This Japan-only PS1 trading card game is notable for being the first instance of the 1998 version of Godzilla meeting his Japanese counterpart. It's also notable for featuring 6 brand new original kaiju and a basketball player clearly meant to look like Charles Barkley. This is one of those games that, like Archipelago Shock, really requires a deep understanding of Japanese to play, and thus I can't say I've played it in any meaningful way. It does look pretty slow and complicated, but it is a shame we never got a true English version. In 1998, Sega released Godzilla Generations for the Sega Dreamcast. The game plays out like a sort of free-roaming Godzilla simulator. In fact, it would later inspire the Godzilla PS4 game and the game Kaiju Simulator for PC. The camera is not player-controlled, so the controls are similar to tank-style games like Resident Evil. The player is tasked with destroying the city they are in as much as possible in order to move on to the next stage. The game is incredibly simple and was notoriously panned upon release, but in my opinion, it offers simple fun for Godzilla fans wanting to mimic and simulate Godzilla as close to the films as possible. It also includes fun and unique Easter eggs like a playable Minya and Dr. Serizawa, as well as a Coliseum where you can train Kaiju on your visual memory unit and battle them against one another. This 1999 sequel to Godzilla Generations fares much better, becoming an arcade rail shooter, something that I would expect more out of Sega. Now, this is a straightforward single-player action game where you control Godzilla and battle the Heisei-era monsters in rail shooting battles similar to Panzer Dragoon. The game is simple fun with great visuals and a unique version of Super Mechagodzilla that's actually exclusive to this game. Definitely worth importing and playing. This is like the 1998 remake version of Godzilla King of the Monsters from 1993. You walk right, you shoot fireballs, you swipe your tail, and you stomp. It's incredibly basic, and the game doesn't even have music. The sprites are well animated, but the game is very limited, very simple, and this is another example of a rare Godzilla game that was never released in Japan. This game is borderline identical to the previous game, but it features different enemy monsters, slightly different controls, an aiming reticule, and some slightly different moves. Again, not something that I can really recommend. Thankfully, we got a brand new Godzilla game in 2002 with Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, considered one of the best Godzilla games of all time. There isn't much to say about this game that hasn't already been said, but if you somehow haven't played Godzilla Destroy All Monsters Melee, know that it's published by Atari and developed by Pipeworks software as practically their debut game. The game features 12 playable characters in arena-style combat with up to 4 players. And this is the first fully 3D fighting game for Godzilla. And it was quite successful in its day, leading to a Player's Choice re-release, as well as a port to the original Xbox, which was funded by Pipeworks themselves. There are 3 main versions of this game: the North American GameCube version, the Japanese GameCube version, and the Xbox version. The North American and Japanese GameCube versions differ only in voice acting, logo, title, and in one single playable character, Mechagodzilla. In the North American version, Mechagodzilla is the Heisei variation, whereas in the Japanese version, the same moveset is mapped to a brand new Kiryu model. The Xbox version contains both characters with slightly unique movesets, 2 exclusive maps, and an exclusive co-op battle mode. It also had exclusive DLC stages that are now considered lost, and it featured slightly revised graphics, and your mileage may vary on those updated character models. I kind of prefer the GameCube version's graphics myself. All in all, this game rules. I kind of like it more than Save the Earth personally, which I know is probably heresy to a lot of Godzilla fans, but either way, it's definitely worth checking out. And speak the devil, Destroy All Monsters Melee wasn't the only new Godzilla game in 2002. We also got Godzilla Domination for the Game Boy Advance. This was developed by WayForward Technologies, known for Contra 4 and Shantae, and would eventually go on to publish Dawn of the Monsters, our Kaiju video game, in 2022. This basically takes the gameplay concepts from the old SNK King of the Monsters games and applies them to Godzilla. The game is pretty underrated and a lot of fun with fantastic music by Jake Kaufman. There are 2 versions of this game, with the North American and Japanese versions featuring different sprite art, and in the case of Mechagodzilla, 2 different Mechagodzillas entirely. So for many people, Godzilla Save the Earth is the best Godzilla video game out there. It's an expanded sequel to Destroy All Monsters Melee that ups the character count to 19, adds an in-depth single-player mode, includes online play, and changes some of the gameplay mechanics. While the original game was a GameCube exclusive for a while, the sequel actually skipped GameCube entirely. This was due to Atari wanting to release a PS2 version and not having the resources to make a version for all three consoles at once. This is another game I don't have to talk about much, since you can probably walk down to the video game room and see it being played in tournament matches later today. If you haven't played it yet, you gotta change that. Godzilla Unleashed is the final game in the quote-unquote Pipeworks trilogy of Godzilla games. And it's a pretty major overhaul from the previous two titles. The number of playable characters is increased to a whopping 26, split into 4 factions: Earth Defenders, Global Defense Force, Aliens, and Mutants. 2 of the monsters, Obsidius and Crystalak, are original monsters created via fan polls across numerous original designs. Two of the monsters, Obsidius and Crystalak, are original monsters created via fan polls across numerous original designs. The controls are completely revamped to support the motion controls of the Wii Remote Nunchuck, and it offers no classic control options for a regular controller configuration. Monsters can now enter a critical mass state inspired by Burning Godzilla, and characters can move and attack at the same time. Environments are all post-catastrophe and are filled with natural disasters and large crystals containing energy power-ups. The game was originally slated to be a Wii exclusive, but at the last minute, a PS2 version was developed based heavily off of Save the Earth. Unfortunately, it was very rushed. It features 6 less characters and 1 exclusive character in Batra, who is a reskin of Mothra. This game was not well received critically, but sold quite well. Despite this, it would mark the end of major home console Godzilla video games for some time. A handheld companion to Godzilla Unleashed, called Godzilla Unleashed Double Smash, is a 2D side-scroller where you switch between ground monsters and flying monsters in a fashion not dissimilar to Godzilla Monster of Monsters, except you can swap between them on the fly. Now, this game holds the dubious title of being the worst reviewed Godzilla video game of all time on game rankings. And honestly, it's a shame, since the idea behind the game is actually pretty neat, but it's clear that the time and money was just not there in order to pull this off. It also features a new kaiju in the form of the Sphinx. Great name. Also, if I had $1 for every time a portable Godzilla game made Mecha King Ghidorah significantly larger than regular King Ghidorah, I'd have $2, which isn't much, but it's strange that it's happened twice. Now we enter a dark age that still really hasn't ended. I'll spoil something for you. From this point until today, we have only had one major home console Godzilla video game release. Gone are the prestige developers and publishers, and for the most part, gone is Toho themselves from developing or publishing. As licensed games move away from dedicated video game devices and into mobile phone games, we just haven't seen the quantity or quality of Godzilla video games that we used to. And since a lot of these games are mobile, a lot of them are lost. Digital-only releases means once they get delisted, they're gone forever. And most of the next games I'm going to mention are delisted. In fact, just assume they're delisted unless I say otherwise. First is Godzilla Monster Mayhem, which is a Java-based game where you run around destroying buildings and military for points. Reminiscent of Rampage in some ways. It's pretty basic, but it's got nice sprites at least. This is developed by India Games, India's largest game developer, who is partly owned by Walt Disney Company India, believe it or not. Another game under the same name for iOS that feels really unfinished, where the only thing you can do is fight Godzilla against King Ghidorah. Godzilla Strike Zone is a tie-in to the 2014 film. You play as one of the soldiers dropping to San Francisco during Godzilla's battle with the Muto in a first-person view. We've got Godzilla Crisis Defense, which is a sort of crisis management game for web browsers that was released to tie into the 2014 film. And Pipeworks finally returned to making Godzilla games. And it's a match-3 puzzle game on mobile. again, like everything else you've seen, delisted, just gone. 1 decade ago, we got the final Godzilla home console video game, simply titled Godzilla in Japan. Initially released on the PS3, Japan only, a beefed up version was immediately produced called Godzilla Versus and was released for the PS4 in Japan, followed by the simply titled Godzilla on PS4 in North America and Europe. Godzilla is essentially a modern remake of Godzilla Generations. You walk around a city trying to destroy as much as possible while also taking on other monsters in a sort of action game, fighting game hybrid. The controls are actually pretty similar to Generations in that they are independent from camera movement. Initially, in the PS3 version, you could only play as Godzilla. In the PS4 version, you can play as multiple monsters and even fight against other players online. If you love destroying generators, you're going to love this game. The game was critically panned, one of the lowest rated Godzilla video games of all time. In all honesty, while the gameplay is clunky and repetitive, I'll admit to enjoying it on occasion for how well it captures the look and feel of the Heisei Godzilla films. Not that my recommendation matters, though. Not that my recommendation matters, though, because it also got delisted and is now one of the priciest PS4 games around. So if you want to play it, you're in a tough spot. The PS3 version from Japan is cheaper, but it's also missing a lot of features. This short-lived Japan-only mobile game had you collecting kaiju for use in simple turn-based battles. It only lasted 1 year before getting pulled from all storefronts. This was a game that was only available for 1 month in 2016 and was a kind of collaboration between Shin Godzilla and Arima Kinen, a horse racing video game. Horse racing games are incredibly popular in Japan, and they have been for decades, and this game had the horse racers completing anti-Godzilla missions. Now, this is pushing the limits of what is a Godzilla video game, and I did cover this before, so I'm not going to talk about it in detail, but I have to say, if you ever wanted a video game to really show how it feels to be a civilian in a kaiju battle, this is the game for you. I really enjoyed this one, and the segment with Kiryu is fantastic. So if you haven't checked out City Shrouded in Shadow, check it out. Be warned, it is entirely in Japanese. There's no English whatsoever, but with a online strategy guide, translating it, you can figure it out, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. I beat the whole game. Now, this is a game in the clicker subgenre. Essentially, all you have to do is click the screen, and your forces will shoot and destroy the enemy monsters. So, honestly, this isn't really a game. It's more of a facsimile of a game. You only need to tap on the screen, and at a certain point, the game tells you that you aren't doing enough damage, so you need to watch advertisements or spend real-world money so you can tap more efficiently. I'm not kidding. I don't often make value judgments on games, but this really is barely a game. It's not even really a game. It's just a way to get people to watch ads, get addicted, and spend real-world money on something that isn't fun. It's very bad. The game is not delisted, last time I checked, but I wish it was. Now, in 2021, Toho announced a new games label producing their own Godzilla games. They're all low-budget mobile games, but it's an exciting step in the right direction. This game involves humans raising and worshipping kaiju, starting off with Godzilla. You enter your kaiju into races. Unfortunately, just like Defense Force, this game is about watching ads and paying real-world money for nonsense. Last time I checked, this is still available. This is the second of 3 games from Toho. It's also very similar to Godzilla Generations, and it has you walking around, destroying buildings, leveling up, and collecting items. Or it would be if the game was still available. This one didn't even last a year before it was delisted. Now, this is undoubtedly the most popular of the Toho Godzilla mobile games. So Battle Line is actually a mobile gacha game where you find kaiju to use in online battles to get more monsters, to do more battles, to get more monsters. You get the idea. This game has also had some collaborations with Ultraman, Gamera, and King Kong. Now, while I haven't really played this game, it's clearly the one with most legs. It's still got some insidious monetization, so watch out, but it's definitely the most well-received game. And in 2024, there was even a mini tournament at G-Fest. Now, Toho released Godzilla Voxel Wars on Steam in 2023. It's essentially a streamlined, simplified, puzzle mode version of Into the Breach, which we covered way back in our first Kaiju Video Games panel. In 2024, Toho released it digitally for Switch. This seems to be pretty well received. If this was it for Godzilla games, I'll be honest, that would be kind of sad. But thankfully it's not. I saved some of the better stuff for last, including pinball and electronic arcade games. So, these 1994 Namco arcade attractions are a lot of fun. I've talked about them before, and they've been brought to the games room at G-Fest before. Godzilla Wars has you shooting targets on an ever-advancing animatronic Godzilla, with each shot sending him further back. He speeds up over time, though, and you've got a mazer you can use once as a get-out-of-jail-free card. Godzilla Wars Jr. has you shooting balls into Godzilla's mouth to try to stop him. And Jr. was actually released here in English. I remember playing it as a kid at my local Discovery Zone. Now, back in the 90s, Sega used to make pinball machines. So for a short period, Sega was making pinball machines by purchasing Data East's pinball division. Later, Sega's pinball division would be purchased by Stern, who still exists to this day. But before Sega Pinball went defunct, they developed a Godzilla table based on the TriStar 1998 Godzilla license. It's actually a pretty slick table, but it's far from my favorite. This table is now technically owned by Stern, who could potentially re-release it digitally as part of their own Stern Pinball Arcade, but that seems sadly unlikely. It's visited the games room here at G-Fest before, and it's at Galloping Ghost Arcade. Speaking of Stern, I have covered this table in a previous Kaiju Video Games History panel, so I won't spend a ton of time here, but I do want to reiterate that this is a fantastic pin, incredibly well designed, features a ton of classic Godzilla characters, and comes in a regular and a deluxe variant. It also comes from Stern, who, funnily enough, started making games in the 70s, turned into 80s pinball, and then got purchased by Sega, who made Sega Pinball, and then the original owner bought it back from Gary and renamed it Stern. What does this mean? Well, it means that both of the Godzilla pinballs, made decades apart, were actually produced by the same company. Now, there are some VR and AR games that I want to mention when it comes to Godzilla. So back in 2016, Toho and Bandai Namco partnered up for a special event with Namja Town, a sort of indoor theme park with a focus placed on its street food made to look like Showa-era Japan. The game was a limited time event available only during the Godzilla collaboration. In the game, you don augmented reality headsets and special wristbands, and you are tasked with repelling Godzilla by throwing fireballs and other weapons at him by flinging your arms. I got to play this while it was set up, and while it was novel, the AR effect was not super well implemented, and the game was pretty tough. Even with a group of friends, we couldn't win the battle and defeat Godzilla. And the Godzilla model is actually ripped right out of the PS4 game, which is kind of funny. Sadly, it's a piece of lost media now, since the game has not reappeared in any way since the event. And sadly, neither has the incredible food from the event. I had the Godzilla Foot Gyoza and the King Ghidorah Rice Pilaf, and frankly, that's the tastiest the King of the Monsters has ever been. Shin Godzilla came out in 2016. You know what else came out in 2016? PlayStation VR. So this free interactive demo was created as a joint promotion in Japan only. It allows you to experience the viewpoint of a civilian during Godzilla's attack in the film. It apparently used CG data from the film itself, and Shinji Higuchi even helped promote it. This all being said, it's quite short, and there is nothing you can do but look around while Godzilla slowly walks towards you as choppers fire on him from above. However, if you want to play this today, you're going to need to find a PS4 that already has it downloaded. It was delisted only a year after release, and there appears to be no plans to make it available again. But the work done to make this might have helped produce something much more elaborate 2 years later. If the PSVR demo was the test drive, this is the real deal. In this light on-rails shooter, you strap into a motion simulator with a VR headset and a joystick and fly around Tokyo during Godzilla's rampage. Similar in some ways to the PSVR demo. This is much longer at 15 minutes and much more dynamic, as not only are you flying around Godzilla in a chopper, you actually get gameplay. You have to shoot him with a blood coagulant in his mouth. Now, I haven't had a chance to experience this myself yet, but here's the good news. It's still available. You can find this at Bandai Namco VR arcades in Japan, though it has hopped around a bit. You can always check Bandai Namco's website for details. And hey, even 2024 has got a new Godzilla game with Godzilla Attack VR, which is a rail shooter arcade game that released just in 2024. This is from the same people behind the unfortunate 2018 Rampage game and the much cooler Kong Skull Island VR arcade game. Godzilla Attack VR is a rail shooter arcade game released in 2024. Who said arcades are dead? This is from the same people behind the unfortunate 2018 Rampage game and the much cooler Kong Skull Island VR arcade game. It includes two scenarios, Megaguirus and Manda. Both involve you flying in a chopper through neon-soaked city streets while you blast away at hordes of monsters and eventually Godzilla himself. The visuals are beautiful and it's action-packed. The game includes Godzilla, Manda, Megaguirus, Meganulon, and some new characters in smaller Manda-like creatures and medium-sized Kiryu-like mechs that attack you. The actual shooting gameplay is honestly pretty limited, with not much potential for scoring or replay, and the game is quite short. Once you play one route, the game ends and you have to pay to play the other. Due to this, it's not something worth dedicating time for multiple runs, but it's definitely worth playing through at least once, especially with a friend. And that's it. Thank you all so much for sitting through this talk, and please, if you're interested, reach out to me on YouTube and check out my other panels.